Hi, this is Karan from San Francisco.
And this is Alex from Los Angeles. And welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self-discovery through a shared love of film. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but we're both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies. We hope these movies and topics are fun and revelatory to you, just like they've been to us. So, Karan, why don't you let our listeners know what we're talking about today?
All right. So our topic for today is movies that shaped our feeling of comfort.
Nice.
I mean, this could be a universal. There's no wrong time to talk about this topic, but we just felt that as we are getting into the holiday season and the spirit of it all, it is kind of that time, to sort of start getting ready for, at least for me personally, kind of a comfort time, even though there's, as we'll get into our holiday episodes and such, there's a lot of anxiety and other emotions that come with the holiday season as well. But this is certainly one of them. So that's what we're doing today. So for my episode, as always, my thinking here was not only just movies, but also like kinds and genres of movies that bring me comfort. And I just say one thing at the top. For me, a comfort movie, I mean, any movie, but especially a comfort movie, has to be well done. Like a lot of people get a lot of pleasure in watching, B movies or C movies or whatever letter you want to ascribe. For me, it has to be well done. Otherwise, it's not comfortable to me at all. It's not comforting to me at all. So that's one thing. And I think then as we get into the list, then you'll see that, different genres and different styles of filmmaking and such get layered on top of that. But to me, all these movies are good in their own right, at least to me. So yeah. How about you?
Yeah. It was this was a fun one for sure. I mean, movies are definitely something that gives me comfort. But there are very specific movies that, I come back to a lot all the time, which is something that I was just thinking, okay, what do I watch when I want to feel good, or when I'm not feeling good, what I want to put on, or if I just stumble upon it, what immediately makes me feel like, there's a warm blanket over me or something like that. And then funnily enough, all my films kind of ended up in a way in the same genre of just, comedy, I guess. And so that it wasn't something I was planning on. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I guess for me, laughing and just, being is something that for me is I guess a comfort because it was just kind of that genre. But it was a fun one. So I'm definitely, especially after our last episode, which about fears, if folks are listening to these in order, was definitely more of a serious and kind of a downer episode in a way. So I'm glad we're immediately going into something a little more, what I think will be a little more uplifting for the listeners. But
I agree.
Yeah.
One other thing I would point out that I don't know if listeners noticed, but we established this rule very early on in the early machinations of the podcast, is that we would not repeat movies. So this made this episode very hard for me because pretty much every movie that I put on any episode, any list, a lot of them happen to be my comfort movies. And it's an easy place for me to go to them because they are, in my mind, they're in my rotation. And perhaps there's an unsaid rule for comfort movies is that they've been rewatched over a period of time. And that was an interesting kind of rule that I put in, at least for myself, that there were other movies that do give me comfort. But then I asked myself, well, I've only watched them twice.
Right.
So does that really, cut the threshold for it to be in my comfort movie list? So I don't know if you had such a thing or no.
No, I definitely did too. That's a really good point to just let the listeners know that as well. That we do not want to repeat films, and there are definitely a lot of movies I could have very easily put on this list that we've already talked about. So I'm not going to mention them, but all three of these films that I will be talking about, I've been watching them for over 20 years on very, very often, and I think that is something that is important to defining what a comfort movie is. It's what you go to when you need comfort, as opposed to just, a movie I might have seen once or twice. Yeah, it makes you feel good, but I'm not reaching for the remote and finding that film when I just need to to get that comfort sense. So
Totally.
for sure the same. The films I'm going to talk about, I think I've seen some of the most times out of any of the movies we've talked about so far on the podcast. So
Not for me, because I've already picked those movies before. So I
okay.
had to kind of go to, in some cases, my third or fourth pick
Mm-hmm.
in that specific kind of movie, that specific genre and what have you. So that was very hard, but we got there.
Yeah.
All right. So what is your number three?
Yeah, so I'll kick it off. My number three film that shaped my feeling of comfort is Pee-wee's Big Adventure from 1985. This film was directed by Tim Burton, starring Paul Rubens, Elizabeth Daily, and a host of other folks. The IMDb plot summary: when eccentric man-child Pee-wee Herman gets his beloved bike stolen in broad daylight, he sets out across the U.S. on the adventure of his life. So I'll just say it with each one of these, but even though I said it at the outset, like, it's a film I've watched countless times. Dating back to I did not see it in theaters. I was too young to see this in theaters, but it was a movie that I first caught on television as a young child and was immediately enthralled with this. I can't remember, honestly, if Pee-wee Herman as a character I knew first and would watch his TV show, because he also had a big children's TV show in the United States that was very popular when I was growing up. And honestly, I don't know if it was the movie that I saw first or the television show, but Pee-wee Herman as a character was always something that was gave me a lot of comfort as a kid. But yeah, so because this movie, to me, I think, as I was thinking more about, okay, why do I watch this movie all the time? Why is this something that I reach to when I do need a feeling of comfort? It is the aura and the vibe that Pee-wee gives off of someone who is just so innocent, so happy. He is a man child, as they said in the IMDb description, which means, yeah, sometimes he throws temper tantrums and is kind of immature and actually treats his, I guess I'll call her girlfriend, Dottie, in this film really, really terribly. He's a total jerk to her for no reason. But it's his likability and the vibe that he gives off in this world that then he inhabits, which is a silly but innocent world that he goes through in this film. So it's not just necessarily him, it's this whole vibe and world that this movie's created. And going into that world makes me feel, also, I kind of catch the vibe of Pee-wee. Like, oh yeah, I feel kind of silly and I feel kind of happy, and I feel like every, the whole world that I'm in then could be maybe just as fun as Pee-wee's. And I just put this movie on, and I don't know, it's like 80 minutes, 85 minutes. And when I'm immersed in Pee-wee's world and the world that this film creates, it immediately just puts me in a great mood. Because again, for me, Paul Rubens's Pee-wee's creation is just so infectious as a fictional character, that really anything Pee-wee does just always makes me feel good. Well, I'll take that back. The second film's terrible, so that movie I would not recommend watching. But it's also just the simplicity too of it. This is not a movie that's complicated. He has a bike that he likes that gets stolen, and it's a road trip, and he tries to get it back. And that also helps me when I want comfort. I kind of want to turn my brain off and just enjoy the ride of this film, and not have it be some really, really heavy, dramatic film or a lot of things that I have to think a lot. And this movie is definitely one where you kind of turn your brain off and enjoy what Pee-wee has to give you. And when I'm looking for comfort and when I need it, I need to unplug my mind a bit and just kind of go back to a simpler time of being like a child, when you don't have to think about things. And I think Pee-wee's as a character, even though he is an older guy, age undefined, but he acts like a child, and it again puts you back in that child mindset. So, movie I've seen countless times, can quote it all the time, listen to the soundtrack. Danny Elfman's score, I think one of his first, if not his first film score. And just a fantastic score. And the film also, as I've grown older, I actually appreciate a lot more as a film. Tim Burton's very first movie, the way that he goes into all these different genres and plays around with, there's like a Western kind of scene, and, there's a really kind of, German expressionist scary nightmare sequence. And he kind of touches on all these different genres, which I'm sure as a filmmaker, especially first time, must have been really fun. And you kind of get that sense throughout this entire film that everyone involved in this is just wanting to put that feeling of fun, those fun vibes out there, including Burton, who obviously later, he's maybe known for his more, darker, I guess I could say, films. But this one has the Burton touch, but is a lot more of a lighter universe. And I think that is, again, why this would be something I'd pull off the shelf and watch versus one of his other darker films. So yeah, just a huge fan of this film. It was always fun to rewatch it.
All right. So I had never watched this movie until, we put it on the list. Obviously, know of it. Maybe I tried to watch the Netflix movie when it came out, but I don't remember really much of it.
Forgot about that one.
Yeah. So I have to be honest and say I could not watch more than 20 minutes of this movie.
You didn't finish it?
I couldn't finish it.
You don't know if he gets his bike, huh?
I don't. I mean, in fact, I figured I'll just ask you because maybe this is one of those cases like we've talked a lot about on the podcast, is that when do you watch a movie in your lifetime? And I think watching a movie like this at age 40, I don't know. I mean, not that I there's plenty of silly stuff that I like. There's no questions. I'm not sort of calling myself someone who doesn't enjoy that.
Right.
But there's something about this character, the laugh and the tics and all of it. I just was like, I cannot handle this. And I actually found myself, I had the opposite reaction to you, which is getting sort of to the comfort, happy, fun place. I wanted to leap out and basically assault PV, which is, I probably should not be saying this out loud on air, but that's why I found myself feeling so aggravated and so violent that I just was like, okay, I have to stop this, because this is actually the total opposite of me getting to a place of happiness and comfort. That said, Tim Burton, the filmmaking, all aspects that you touched on, all of that is obviously amazingly done. And, I will give him and everybody involved full marks for commitment. Everybody's in it. And that is something that I do appreciate. And that actually does, to some level, brings comfort, right? Like seeing people on the same page, committed to something, is definitely one of the things that I draw comfort from, that aspect will come up in my list later. But PV, I'm sorry.
Not your guy. No. Was this, so you hadn't seen the film, was this your first introduction to Pee-wee as a character? Okay, yeah. I mean, this film actually was, I probably shouldn't say if it was the first of these type of movies, because I might be wrong, but it definitely popularized there's a comedic persona, and we're going to kind of like build a movie around it, because it wasn't like Pee-wee existed as a Broadway show first, and then, this film. So after this, we actually even talked about one of these movies in the past, like UHF, there's a Weird Al persona, let's build a movie around him. And there's a lot of those types of films after the success of this one over about a 10-year period. And it definitely is something where if you don't like the persona of what they're doing, there's no way you're going to like the movie. Like if you don't like Weird Al, UHF isn't going to work. You don't like Pee-wee, this movie's definitely not going to work. You don't like I don't know, Andrew Dice Clay, then the Ford, whatever that movie was called, that's not going to work. So yeah, I'm not surprised that as someone who doesn't vibe with Pee-wee, then this movie would be aggravating to get through for sure. Yeah, I could see Pee-wee being a divisive in terms of either you kind of like it works or he's the most aggravating, annoying person ever. So I'm not surprised. And maybe, you know what, we'll throw it back and testament to the filmmakers, right? They capture that essence. It just was an essence that was like oil and water for you.
But full marks for commitment. Like it's not. And that's one thing. I mean, Tim Burton now is, sadly in a different stage of his career. But one thing that he always gets sort of my leeway on is that sense of full commitment. There's nobody else who will fully adorn a world and kind of go to the nth degree with it. So I appreciate it, of course.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's why the other Pee-wee film. And the second one, as I said, is terrible. The Netflix one actually wasn't so bad, but both of them, I think, lack the lightning in a bottle of who Pee-wee is. Hell, maybe then you'll like those ones better.
I doubt it. I don't think I can engage with this again.
But that's the credit, I think, to your point, to Burton, that he is able to do that, and the other filmmakers that tackled the same character just could not could not get there as much as Ruben show. So
Yeah.
well,
And it is his kind of character, like all of Johnny Depp's characters that Tim
oh
Burton has
yes,
done. You could sort of, when I watched this movie, like, oh, this makes so much sense because they
mm-hmm.
all seem to, you can draw a connection line back to PV,
Right.
makeup, the slight silliness and goofiness, but they're also dark. And yeah, it was sort of like, yeah, you're horrible to your girlfriend and you're a
Mm-hmm.
joke yourself. And that's sort
Mm-hmm.
of when I was kind of losing it, fumes coming out of my
Yeah.
ears. At least you could have been nicer,
Yeah.
for being so annoying and irritating. But I digress. But there's a lot of connections, at least I felt, from Johnny Depp to this guy.
Yeah, I think Burton, what his connects his films is he does always pick like an odd outsider, whether it's like Pee Wee Herman or Edward Scissorhands or Bruce Wayne, or that is his angle into the world. So yeah, I'm not surprised you found that connection too. Cool. So moving on from Pee Wee, what is your number 3 film?
All right. So my number 3 is a little known film called North by Northwest, 1959, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, starring Cary Grant, Eve Marie Saint, James Mason, Martin Landau. Quick summary for those who haven't seen this movie. A New York City advertising executive goes on the run after being mistaken for a government agent by a group of foreign spies and falls for a woman whose loyalties he begins to doubt. So I put this movie on my list. Speaking of sort of transitions, like two movies that are so polar opposite, I think they have nothing in common. But I put this movie on my list because really of my love of sort of mystery movies and whodunits. It's one of my great comfort genres, and we'll get into our massive list of things that are not on the list, and I can share a lot more there. But I kind of picked this up because I just felt, well, who is the master of this genre? And it is Hitchcock. And I think a lot of his movies have this aspect of sort of whodunit and mystery and such. But I think this one probably is on my rewatchable list the most because I think it's the most fun of them. It's one of those movies where the plot, and let me say this, I love mystery not so much for the plot anyway, and in this movie the plot doesn't even make sense. I've watched this movie so many times, I don't think I fully understand it, but it doesn't really matter. It is really the piece that's comforting to me in the mystery genre is the comfort of the process and the revelation of the clues as they come at you, and there's something very enjoyable about that. But then you see this, see all of that with beautiful people, Cary Grant, Eve Marie Saint, at the height of their powers, in, beautiful locations, set pieces, all the Hitchcockian sort of flares of, beautiful cinematography, probably one of my all-time favorite scores. All of that put together is sort of what makes this movie so fun, so delightful. And yeah, you sort of on a journey. Like I said, I still don't understand what really happens. Like, why are they on Mount Rushmore? That scene is sort of odd, weird, but who cares? It's just such a delight. And the fact that Cary Grant, of all people, is in a Mistaken Identity movie, who is so noticeable and so distinguished, that in itself is kind of a joke. But I guess that's the point and the genius of the movie and the genius of Hitchcock. Like, he's a master of casting his movies, even though he famously doesn't really care for actors and their process and all of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's not much that I can add to everything that's been said about this movie, over decades and decades. But yeah, I just love this one. And yeah, that's my number 3, North by Northwest.
Yeah, I love this film as well. I mean, it's not only am I a fan of Hitchcock, but I do think, actually, I will say this is my favorite movie of his.
Oh, really?
For sure. Yeah. And I could make a case for it being his best film, but we covered Vertigo like a couple episodes ago. And now I think academically, I feel that is actually a better film potentially. But North by Northwest is just, it is we've talked about this a couple times in the podcast before, like a perfect movie in the sense of everybody is, all the craftsmen and artists came together doing all their best work, and all their best work adds together to a perfect film, which sometimes you don't always get. But yeah, this movie, again, what can you kind of say that hasn't already been said about how good this is? But it is, you mentioned, I think, at the outset, that one of the, the things that brings you comfort is that, like, watching perfection in front of you, which doesn't come through necessarily on my list. At least it's a very subjective perfection for me. But I think North by Northwest is objectively like a perfect film. Perfect. And yeah. I do get an enjoyment out of watching that too. It's just like how, when you watch these sequences, it's how Hitchcock crafted this and really just set the blueprint for like an entire genre of like modern spy thrillers. So many different films you watch that you've seen, you see that in this film, and how he constructs it, how he uses the camera angles, how he uses landmarks. He used the Statue of Liberty once in Saboteur, but I mean, this film, it's like he's hitting you overhead with, here's the UN, here's Mount Rushmore, and it's not just like a set piece, it's like the focus where you're like, right. It kind of up levels the scale of what's going on when you see this. It's fantastic. And then you also have and every time I watch this film, it feels like a Bond movie to me. And I know it's been said, the Broccoli, and Saltzman, who did the Bond films, are heavily inspired by this movie. And it definitely feels exactly like a, early, Sean Connery era Bond film.
If not better. I mean, I personally.
Oh yeah. It's way better than those films.
Way better.
Yeah. But they cribbed like, the Bond girl who might be good, might be bad. You have the villain, but then you have the henchman in Martin Landau. It's just, and again, all this big set pieces. Like, he was very great, Hitchcock, at doing these large action set pieces, and which again, Bond films have that too. But totally. Just a fantastic film. It was really fun to watch this again. I mean, it's one of those films too where if I stumble across it on TV, I mean, I guess I don't really watch TV anymore like that way. But in the old days, when I used to browse around, and if this movie was on a channel, it's like, oh, nice, okay, I'm watching North by Northwest. Like, I have to watch.
Totally. This. In fact, I should have mentioned, I think that's one of my other kind of barometers, if you will, for comfort movies, is that one use case is that you put it on with intention, that you want to seek it. The other one is that you accidentally catch it and you just have to watch either all of it, or you can sort of jump in at any point and watch a little bit of it, and it brings you instant joy, instant comfort. And I think all my movies are like that. This one is definitely like that. And we've talked about this, and again, this is no hot take. Like, Hitchcock, it depends on how much you want to engage with him. Like, you could watch these movies at a very surface level and get so much pleasure out of it. Or if you want to go deeper in the psychology of desire or all of his own personal demons that are all over the movies that he makes, the technical mastery, all of that, if you want to engage with that, you can go, 6 layers deeper. And depending on kind of, where I'm at in my mood and time frame or what have you, I sort of make a choice, consciously or unconsciously, to engage with it howsoever I want. And I think that's the other beauty of this movie and a lot of Hitchcock movies, is that it meets you where you're at. And I think that, to me, is also very comforting. And because comfort doesn't, at least for me, doesn't have to be dumb thrills. Sometimes I want that, but I do want to at least see the layers behind it so that I can engage with it if I want to. And let's just face it, I end up doing that every time I watch it. It's, that's the power of his movies, and just sort of how my brain works too, I suppose. So yeah, that's that. Number 3. What's your next?
So my next film is very different, I guess I should say that, at least for why it's on the list. It's Commando from 1985. So this film is directed by Mark Lester, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Ray Don Chong, Dan Hedaya, and Alyssa Milano. The IMDb plot summary is: a retired special forces colonel tries to save his daughter, who's abducted by his former subordinate. I guess it sounds kind of exciting. And this movie is the exact opposite of North by Northwest, in the sense of it is incredibly dumb, stupid B movie. Very simple, like a plot that, I mean, is not even any more complex than that IMDb plot summary. That is all that it is. That is literally it. But for me, stupid and cheesy is something that has always been comforting for me. I'm a huge fan of B movies. There was a show on in the United States when I was growing up called Mystery Science Theater 3000 that
Huh.
basically was it's a comedy show where they would take an old movie from like the 30s or 40s. It was just a terrible B movie, and then they'd watch it and you'd see the cast watching the film and then just make fun of the film through the movie. And that, I mean, I grew up on that show and exposed me to like hundreds, maybe even thousands of just absolutely some of the worst movies ever made. But because the show, was a comedy show, and these movies do have, at least for me, some sort of they're endearing quality and how bad they are. So that was my gateway into bad movies. And this movie was a movie that I first saw. I mean, I can remember seeing it on a school trip we took in junior high down to New York, I think it was, on a bus. And it was like, what do you, for a bunch of like 14-year-old boys, what do you do to keep them calm? It was like a bunch of different movies. Actually, two of the other films we watched on that trip are my non-make it list. But there was the first time I saw Commando. I'm like, this is like the greatest thing I've ever seen. I was a huge Arnold fan, and this is him at the height of his powers, in the sense of he literally is just like an object in this movie. Terrible actor, but that's what makes it fun. Totally unbelievable, but that what makes it fun. Even from like the opening scene of this film is like, the score's playing and you see him doing all these like manly things. He's like carrying a log and he's like, cutting this, down a tree or whatever. And then all of a sudden it switches to like the score switches to this nice, like, fun score, and he's hanging out with his daughter, and then he's feeding some deer and they're eating ice cream together and like laughing. It's like the weirdest thing, but it's so funny.
And it's like a Havana sort of like score, like
yeah, it's
like
a calypso steel drum music
score. I'm like, where are we?
Totally. Yeah, the score, I love this. James Horner, one of his early scores, just the fantastic score. I have that too and listen to it all the time. But yeah, just so ridiculous. And just the quotable lines too. I mean, this is actually something that's a theme through all three of my films. But just lines that I quote all the time. And just so many quotable one-liners, like I eat green berets for breakfast and I'm really hungry. And then he attacks the guy. Or remember when I promised to kill you last? I lied. And then he kills the guy. So those one-liners are just, again, give me comfort because they make me laugh. And this is a film that I've seen dozens and dozens of times. I had to put something on here that was incredibly cheesy and stupid because I enjoy so many of those types of movies when I just want to, like, again, turn my brain off. Which is a theme of a lot of the films on my list of like, yeah, look, I don't want to think too much about it because this movie's dumb, but I put it on and like I'm just I mean, that ending sequence where he's trying to get his daughter back and he goes down to some Central American country because they're who kidnapped him, and he storms this base essentially of where his daughter's being kidnapped, and he kills probably like 100 people, and I'm probably not even exaggerating that. Just walks in, just machine gunning them, and there are these scenes where it's like people are shooting at him. There's like 40 guys shooting at him, and he is literally just standing there, not getting shot, and just shooting back, and they're all falling dead. It's I mean, they've made fun of this in some of the Naked Gun movie, or not Naked Gun, sorry, Hot Shots movies later on, because it is so ridiculous. But yeah, that's just what this movie is, incredibly dumb, and I just always get a kick out of it, and it puts me in a great mood. In the end of the fight too, it's like Arnold, who's this is, I think, the movie where he might be the biggest once his mainstream. He is huge. He's huge. And the battle at the end is by this like sort of flabby Australian guy with like a chainmail shirt. It's like Arnold could kill him with one punch, but yet the movie makes it like, oh, this is the big confrontation between Arnold and the final big boss. And it's like, this is absolutely stupid. Like, he could take this guy in so many different ways, but the movie makes it seem like some grand big battle. And it's it's absolutely ridiculous. But I had to put Commando on my list, and
not to mention the woman who's like, "Sure, I'll come along with you. I'll help you." I was like, what?
Yeah, no, because he kind of kidnaps her. Essentially, he takes her car.
But you could have left. After
I know.
That.
Yeah, in literally one scene, she goes to him like, "I hate. Like, what are you doing? Yeah. No, take me back. Okay, I'll help you." And it makes no sense on any level at all. But again, that's for me. That's what makes this movie, dumb and therefore comforting.
Amazing. So I have vague memories of having watched this movie as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you've talked about this on the podcast, but I grew up as an army brat, so we would move quite a bit. And one of the big kind of things of army life, at least growing up in India, is that there are a lot of these social events and gatherings, parties and such. And
Mm-hmm.
usually what would happen is that the officers and, their significant others, they are all sort of in the main foyer or in like a kind of a garden outside with a bar and with formal dressing and, waiters showing up, what have you. They'll put the kids in like a TV room somewhere.
Oh, okay.
And put on whatever, VHS was sort of the VHS of the time. So I have vague memories of watching this movie in that sort of setup.
Oh, interesting.
And kind of just, enjoying it with
Yeah.
other kids and what have you, and, laughing at it or being scared by it too, because, it's still pretty young. So since then, I had not watched this movie, and I watched it, a couple of weeks ago once you put it on the list. And I agree with everything you said and how silly it is, but I had a really good time.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's entertaining. Yeah.
Unlike PV that I couldn't even watch like this, I thoroughly enjoyed. And once again, it's ridiculous, but I find a lot of comfort in sort of the commitment. Mm-hmm. Everybody is in on it,
Right.
Every department, every actor. And we were having this chat last time about sort of what makes a B movie versus not. I think to me, it is that commitment part that elevates it from what I would call a B movie, which is just so atrociously bad that it's unwatchable.
Okay.
You are laughing at the movie. And sure, I was laughing at it in terms of how ridiculous it is. And we touched on a bunch of things that are in that category. But I can't laugh at the commitment and the work that went into it, from frame A to frame Z. So, which is what elevates it. And that's why I can watch it and enjoy it. Otherwise, if this was just badly made, badly done, and ridiculous, I would leave.
Right. Yeah. It's like a commitment to the bit almost. It's like everyone in this, they're treating it seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
And because they're doing that, then it makes you can laugh at how bad it is. But if they knew it was bad and they weren't trying, because there are some movies you can tell are like, look, we need to make this some exploitation film, and like, who cares? And if you put no effort into it, that's not as enjoyable because you're not getting that passion. It's like the passion and the commitment that sometimes even if it doesn't work, then it's still entertaining. I think you hit it on it. It's about and I think that's. Yeah, that is what I enjoy about B movies. The ones at least I enjoy are the ones that are, so bad it's good, because the people did not think they were making a B movie. No. They thought they were making like, something that was going to blow the doors off everything. I mean, granted, Arnold was still a big star at the time. But the tone of this is like, there's no way anyone could have thought this was treated seriously. But hey, everyone did everyone was committed to the bit in this film, all the actors. And I think that is what makes it so entertaining, and a time capsule too of this type of film from that time.
Type of film. Yeah, totally. And I think there's something to be said about the pacing of it as well. It moves so beautifully that it doesn't really give you that much of a chance to question it or think about it, because that's not the point. You're in for the ride.
Right.
Because if you start thinking about it, how can someone who looks like Arnold be a dad? Like that, just stop right there, from the opening frame. Like, just even that doesn't make sense. It's completely unbelievable, like it doesn't make sense in my mind, but they don't give it too much time. Like, we are off to the races right off the bat, and that's why it's super fun.
Yeah, totally. And not to compare this film to North by Northwest, but I do think that film too, to your point when you said the plot doesn't really make any sense. And it kind of doesn't, but that's not the point, because you're enjoying the film so much, because immediately stuff starts happening in North by Northwest. And that's a very brisk movie too. And I think, you're right about Commando too. It's like, it just goes from the second that, that first hilarious opening title sequence, and this movie just going. And if you were to stop and think about it, you're like, this is dumb. And it's, well, yeah, I know this is dumb, but I'm enjoying it because it's moving so fast. It doesn't give you that time to kind of pause. So, okay, I guess I am comparing those two movies. I mean, Arnold's basically like Cary Grant at the end of the day.
I mean, different version of it, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the acting part, like, everybody is at the same level. So, which also is sort of smart, which is why I don't call this a B movie, because you need some intellect and thoughtfulness to make something that actually works.
Mm.
Everybody's at the same level, you know?
Right. Oh yeah,
And in
totally.
fact, there's some scenes that I'm like, Arnold, you were actually the most convincing with this line. Good job, you
Yeah.
know?
Don't disturb my friend. He's dead tired. That's another one of my favorite ones
uh,
too when he's on the plane. But yeah.
Also, there are a lot of like similar dialogues, like from the Terminator franchise, like
Yeah.
slight variations. Like Hasta la Vista shows up in the movie, and I've
He says I'll
forgotten.
be back at one
He
point
says,
in
"I'll be
this. He
back." Yeah,
does. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he's at
So
that point he has the persona. This is a year
yeah,
after Terminator, so
it's
he already knows what
hilarious
he's
that they
doing.
would do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I also find it funny because you mentioned you saw this movie basically as a kid, and
Mm,
the adults put a VHS tape on to just kind of like keep the kids quiet or calm
right.
down. Same thing for me, but as a
Yeah.
14-year-old, like, let's shut these teenage boys up on a bus. Here, just watch Commando. So I love how
Exactly.
like, we both were exposed to this film as just like a parenting tool, I guess, for lack of a better word, just to like shut up some boys or whatever. So it's funny. I
Crazy
find
and
that really funny.
totally child inappropriate for
Oh,
sure. You know.
completely. Oh yeah, totally, completely.
And
But it
especially,
worked.
but it worked, I suppose.
Yeah.
But that's why, like, I don't know what kids are doing now, but like back then, all that kids wanted was something to shoot with
Mm-hmm.
and play all these video games where you're essentially shooting people. And then we question, where does all this violence come from?
Right.
Well,
No,
there you
totally.
have it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a
Uh,
fun movie. Definitely enjoyable. Great. So yeah, why don't we move on to your number two comfort film now? What do you got for us, Karan?
all right. Couldn't be more different from what we were just talking about. But my number two is the Grand Budapest Hotel from 2014, directed by Wes Anderson, starring Ralph Fiennes, F. Murray Abraham, Tony Revolori. Quick IMDb logline: a writer encounters the owner of an aging high-class hotel who tells him of his early years serving as a lobby boy in the hotel's glorious years under an exceptional concierge. So I put this movie on my list because this movie sort of captures my love for period films, especially period films in the kind of the World War II era. And there's so many movies I could have picked, but I think this is the one that I watched the most, and also a movie that wasn't taken. But I think sort of digging deeper, I think to me, why this is so comforting is that it's basically a company of actors coming together in this environment of exquisite costume design, exquisite production design, which really is true for a lot of Wes's movies. But the reason why this movie makes this list for me is because I think this movie is the perfect balance of heart, quirkiness, humor, melancholy amongst all of Wes's movies. Because I think all of his other movies sort of index a little bit more on one of those qualities versus the other. Versus I think this movie is sort of pitch perfect, and that's why probably this is his most accessible film as well, and probably his most successful too. But personally, for me, the stuff I love about period films, especially from the World War II era, like the hotel, especially the 1930s part of this movie, it just doesn't get better than that, right? Like it's a feast for the eyes. You're transported back. All the details from the stop motion to Mendel's to the perfumes to the costumes to every little detail is just so exquisite. And then similarly in the 1960s environment, I'm a sucker for mid-century modern design, so that appeals to me in that sort of way. So I think from a visual aesthetic standpoint, like this movie is sort of check, 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 and kind of building on what we were talking about, even with North by Northwest. But then I think the other part of this movie is, which makes it charming and sort of comforting to me, is in its central character. Like Gustavich, there's no character written like that. I think somebody who's kind of eccentric, impulsive, improper, but also very charming, very loving, very lovable. And at the core of it, I think this movie is a friendship movie between
Mm-hmm.
him and Zero. And,
Yeah.
the two actors, Ralph Fiennes especially, so I'm still mad that he wasn't nominated for an Oscar. Like, oh, what a travesty. But
Yeah.
I think
Insane.
it's his
Yeah.
career best performance in my mind. But yeah, the core of it is this friendship between these two. And that's where the heart comes from. Like, I think if this movie was just beautiful to look at and beautifully made, I don't think this movie would make my list. I would appreciate it. But I think what gives it that extra depth and meaning, and why I stay with it and why I keep coming back to it, is because of that friendship and that kind of the heart between those two guys. And then the last thing I would say is, in a meta kind of way, it's comforting to watch Wes's movies because it's a bunch of friends coming together to make something they care and love about. And what's not comforting about that? Like every movie of his pretty much has the same people, and for the duration of the movie or whatever little scene I might watch of his movies, no matter what might be going on in my day or in my life, I'm sort of comforted that here's a bunch of people who enjoy each other. They're on the same page. They creatively fulfill each other, elevate each other's games, and create something that's just so beautiful and amazing. And, I get it. Like, Wes is also kind of a hit or miss and is not everybody's cup of tea. And I wouldn't say that I love all of his movies, because especially when the quirky dial is way to the 100, I don't think I can go all the way there. But this one is definitely a special one. And like North by Northwest, I can watch the whole thing. I can just watch segments of it and just get a lot of delight and joy. Sometimes just visually at the surface, other times at deeper layers.
Yeah, this is a film I really like a lot as well. As you know, I am a huge Wes Anderson fan. I think we've covered a lot of his films already in the podcast. I think we only have a couple we haven't talked about, but this is definitely at the upper end of what he's done. It was interesting too, as I was watching this, thinking about, as a comfort film, just compared to his other films. I do feel like this might be his most fun movie in a way. Like the whole thing just has even though they deal with some really dramatic, and obviously there's themes in this movie that are very serious and melancholic and all that kind of stuff. Especially the opening and ending of the film is kind of framed by more of a somber tale. But yeah, this movie for some reason is just so fun. And I think it really is down to, that friendship between, Ray Fiennes and Zero that makes this movie fun. And more so again than I think any of his other movies, save maybe Bottle Rocket. And something that too, I think this movie and in a way, like another theme that I don't really touch on too much in the films I'm talking about, but that represents comfort for me, is just a world that is so intricately created that I would just, I kind of want to be in that.
Totally.
And that makes me feel I get absorbed into this world that I want to be in. I would love to be in the Grand Budapest Hotel, like just to be sitting in the lobby and seeing all this stuff. I don't even have to be a guest. I want to eat some of the Mendel's. I mean, every time I see those Mendel's cakes, I'm just like, oh my God.
I want Mendel's cakes, and I want the clothing from the 60s era.
Oh,
I want those suits.
Yeah. So that is something that is, again, I didn't capture this in my films, but a comfort movie to me is a world I want to be in this world. Because not all of Wes's worlds are necessarily desirable to be in, but this one for sure is. I think the funness of this movie too is a movie, even, again, like North by Northwest, where there is other things going on. There's a lot of themes that this movie touches on. It's a lot about, post, World War II Europe, and, just themes about, the death of like kind of a society and a way of life. And these are important things, but the movie doesn't necessarily, if you kind of skip over that or don't want to focus on that, the movie still is a ride that is really fun. Just like you were saying, North by Northwest, you can turn your brain off and have a great time, or you can turn it on and then get more out of it. It's like your choice, which I think is what this film does so well. But
we'll keep finding that on my list. They're all like that.
The brain on or off switch.
It's up to you how much you want to engage. I mean, immigration, immigrants, all of that is sort of all in there. And if you want to engage with it or even interrogate it or critique it, you can do so. But if not, then that's good too.
I think this is the movie of his that works the most on two different levels. That you really can just kind of go through this as a breezy, fun movie with these two guys trying to chase down the Will, and then you got Willem Dafoe's characters are so silly and kind of going after him, and it's all this really fun plot elements, and you just don't have to think about anything. But if you do, there's so much there. And that's why I think this movie was celebrated so much it was an Oscar nominated screenplay, right? I believe,
Oh
and
yeah.
picture and all that kind of stuff. But certainly overlooked for Ray Fiennes. I mean, I'm 100% agree with you. His career defining performance so far. Hopefully he continue to give us great work. But I mean, just what a character he created here, and just the way he's able to make this guy into someone who cares so much about this society and upholding these ways of the manners and ways of doing things. But in the flip of a hat, he'll be like, I don't care. Like, you know what? Like he'll swear, like, he'll swear. So it doesn't matter. Like, I love that scene where he's like, oh, the boy with apple painting. And I'm going to look at I'm on my deathbed. I'll be looking up at this painting, and through my entire life, this means the most to me. Or we'll just sell it and make some money. Let's just sell it like that. I love that. That is just a perfect encapsulation. His character is so rich. Like, definitely one of Wes's most interesting characters. For sure.
And total flesh and blood, right?
Like, oh yeah.
You feel like, and that's the thing. Like I was saying, you remove him and this performance, the movie falls apart.
I agree.
It just sort of becomes like a beautiful, jewel box of a movie, which a lot of Wes's movies are. But it's all real because of him, which is amazing. Yeah.
I was very fun to rewatch it. So thanks for putting it on the list. And then maybe one day we'll get to the other, I think it's like 2 or 3 Anderson, maybe 4 Anderson films we never talked about. I feel like this might be the director we complete somehow the first. Who knows? We'll see.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
All right. What's your number one?
So my number one film is Ghostbusters from 1984. Which I'm just realizing all of my films came out within a year of each other. So that might mean something. I don't know.
That.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe that goes back to the fact that I've seen all these movies as a young boy all the way up until now. Anyway, who knows? So Ghostbusters, directed by Ivan Reitman, starring Bill Murray, who was also in Budapest, Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, Sigourney Weaver, and Ernie Hudson. The IMDb plot summary of this film: 3 parapsychologists forced out of their university funding set up shop as a unique ghost removal service in New York City, attracting frightened yet skeptical customers. So this movie had to be number one for me, and not only because it's one of the films I've probably watched the most in my entire life, from back to end. It's a film I watched a lot as a kid, which is something that was important to me to kind of like feel like a kid again, because I can kind of go back and remember all the different times I would watch this movie throughout my childhood. It's also, like my other 2 films too, very quotable. But this movie, I've seen it so many times, I've essentially kind of memorized the entire script. So it's like I'm watching it, and it's almost like a mantra or something, like people do when I'm not someone who meditates, but almost like the dialogue puts me into this like meditative, perfect comfort state, because I know everything that's going to happen, every frame, every edit. It's just this movie is like absorbed in me. But like my other 2, again, it is a comedy with characters who I love and I want to spend time with, much like Arnold in Commando, and then Pee-wee in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, or even in like the Wes Anderson movie we just talked about. You kind of want to hang out with these people. It's sort of like you're meeting back up with some old friends. And this movie, which similar to definitely Pee-wee, but a little way Commando too, are kind of character driven more than they are anything else. Yeah. And I love Ray Stantz, and I love Egon and Peter Venkman, and these are people I feel like are my friends. Because I've watched this film so many times. So putting it on or stumbling across, it's like, oh, great, let's hang out for 20 minutes. And I can watch it for 15-minute segments or the whole thing, or it's like every time I see it on TV, I gotta stop and watch it. But definitely one of my most watched movies. Maybe the first Star Wars film I've watched more, but maybe this. It literally could be Ghostbusters. And about the film, I also, this is maybe more subjective than objective, but I would put this on a very short list of perfect movies, and like every creative decision in this film works for me. And it's just an amalgamation of the right cast, the right creatives behind in terms of on the script, with what Harold Ramis and Aykroyd did, Ivan Reitman coming in, and they also, in the same way that we mentioned North by Northwest, kind of created a genre. This movie did create this like sci-fi action genre that has been replicated. I'm sorry, yes, comedy. Yeah, that's the key one. Sci-fi comedy action that has been replicated, decades since. Everyone's trying to recapture that magic, and sometimes it works pretty well, like a Men in Black. But other times it doesn't work very well. There's like that, I think it was R.I.P.D. or some movie with Jeff Bridges and Ryan Reynolds they did about 10 years ago. It's like people are trying to capture that Ghostbusters magic, and they had lightning in a bottle here, and that is something too that, in the same way we mentioned North by Northwest, watching something, the perfect masters at work, just I want to say it's like they didn't really even know, I think, what they were doing on this film. Hitchcock is such a perfect, like he's got it all in his head. I feel like these guys, a lot of it was improv, and these actors were just kind of showing up on set and seeing what was going to work. And the fact that they were able to put together something that is just an incredible movie like this, I think is something, again, that kind of gives me comfort in that way too. So every time I watch this movie, I just feel like a kid again, and had to be number one. No question for me. This was an easy one.
I wasn't surprised to see this on your list. I know this much about you. So yeah, I agree with everything you said. Like, this is a complete joy. I didn't grow up with it. I feel like if I had watched it at the age that, you watched it, this probably would have been my rotation. It's not in my rotation, but whenever I do watch it, I'm always blown away by how good it is. And like you said, there's sort of like an accidental, understated or not stated genius to it. And I think for a movie like this, it has to be that way, because the moment you start to, piece a movie like this together with intent, I don't think it works. And that's why every other movie that's tried to do that thereon after, most of them fail. And I think comedy is the main kind of sort of secret glue there, because I think you can make a sci-fi action movie or just an action movie with a lot of intent. I think humor is just so volatile and so hard to grasp that it can only sort of come through in this sort of very organic way. And that's why so much of it has to do with assembling the right people. And I think this movie is all about that, of just having the right people at the right time and creating that environment and space for all of that magic to happen, literally.
Yeah.
And it did.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think the thing that works so well in this film too, that a lot of other films that try to copy it or take the formula that sort of misses, it's a comedy, but the people in the world kind of are, maybe Venkman aside, because he's there to kind of make fun of everything that's going on, but the world is serious. The consequences are serious. The end 20 minutes of this film is not, it turns into just a sci-fi action movie when they have to go and save Dana and go up the apartment and fight the Stay Puft Marshmallow. There's a couple jokes peppered in there a little bit, but if you didn't treat the stakes seriously and the consequence of this world seriously as an audience member, I just think the film just becomes a joke. And it's just the comedy. So the comedy in this film is a very fine line that this walks, and rarely is it ever accomplished, where it's a realistic world where there's comedic elements that are funny, but the characters are treating the situation seriously, and the audience is too. There are real stakes in this movie. And that tone is what I think makes this film so unique. And a lot of the imitators, and I love Ghostbusters too. We've even talked about it on a podcast before, but even that film is criticized for not really nailing that tone properly and being a little bit too goofy and too silly and not taking itself as seriously as this film. I can even say for comedies, sometimes the best comedies are movies that do take themselves seriously, but there's comedic elements.
Totally. But they don't know they're funny.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
No, I'm totally with you. You're not laughing at these people, you're laughing with them. And the circumstances and life that's unfolding in front of them, that's where the fun is at.
Right.
Not because they're stupid or silly.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so now that we have my number one, let's go to yours. What's your number one movie that makes you feel comfortable?
Comforted, rather.
Comforted or comfortable. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
So my number one is It's Complicated from 2009, directed by Nancy Meyer, starring Meryl Streep, Steve Martin, Alec Baldwin. Quick log line: when attending their son's college graduation, a couple reignite the spark in their relationship, but the complicated fact is they're divorced and he's remarried. That's actually a pretty good log line.
They nailed it that time.
They nailed it.
Yeah. It actually, maybe it's not that complicated.
Okay, so this is my number one. First of all, Because it's Meryl Streep. There is nobody else, and I think you already know this about me, that who doesn't give me that much comfort. And it's at all levels, somebody who's so good and masterful at what she does, how she inhabits characters, just watching her work, the mastery of it. Um, I I would say, barring Sophie's Choice, any Meryl Streep movie is comforting to me, even a dark drama. Like if I want to just, engage with something that makes me feel good about the fact that, yeah, somebody can be that good, and that's pretty comforting to watch. So I think, and to make add to that, like she's cinematic, and
Right.
there are very few people uh who the camera loves as much as Meryl Streep. It's not just about talent and mastery. There's so many other things at play here.
Mm-hmm.
That aside, I think this movie also captures my other big love, which is my love of food. I think this movie is very much a movie about the love of food and the love of relationships over food. You see that peppered throughout the movie. And you're sort of seeing all of this amidst beautiful contemporary locations and spaces. And this is where I give Nancy Myers a lot of credit. Like, this might, seem very simple and easy to do, but to get this level of beauty and elegance, but do it in such a, easy, nonchalant, deft kind of way where things just kind of come together, it's actually really, really hard. Also, another genre, we've been talking a lot about movies that have been starters of their kind of films. Nancy Myers and her ex-husband, what they started, and then Nora Ephron, other people kind of picked it up. Like, these people are the originators of the modern rom-com, and it's probably the hardest genre to nail because it's
Mm-hmm.
just so tricky in terms of tone. And I think she's a master of it. And I think the center of it is, of course, is very funny, but I think the center of it is the chemistry between these three actors. Because once again, like you were saying, this movie could be a B movie, with the same plot line, the same beautiful locations and homes and kitchens and such. If you have lesser actors who are not embodying their characters and
Mm-hmm.
making it feel like it's their real life. But here you see that. You see the pain in these relationships, you see the yearning in these relationships, and that's why you care. That's why the impact of this kind of odd screwball thing happening actually has some resonance. The kids and everybody, take it, leave it, it's fine, but I'm not really there for them anyway. This movie is really about just these amazing actors coming together and having fun. That's the other thing. I think you called this out in your previous pick. You see all of these people having so much fun in this movie, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
making croissants or getting high, or dancing after a few dirty, stiff martinis. Like, it's just so fun watching people have fun on the big screen, and none other than these three, who are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, this is one of my happy place movies. It is happened to be shot in Santa Barbara, which is my real life happy place. When I lived in LA, I would frequently take personal retreats to Santa Barbara, which is just like a weekend day trip, walk around, eat good food, watch the ocean, and then think about life on the way back. Like, this was my sort of favorite thing to do when I lived in LA. So yeah, this movie has a lot of kind of personal meaning and comfort to me. So yeah, that's that. It's complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, this I hadn't seen this film before, and definitely watching it, I was not surprised this was on your list and that it was
Mhm.
number that now I'm not surprised to hear it be number one because it's one of those things, especially over the course of this podcast. I'm like, oh yeah, no, this is definitely like a movie that you would eat it up. um, but yeah, like, I had not, again, as I said, I hadn't seen it before. I thought it was fine. Like, it was a lot of interesting things about it though, because I know it was a huge hit, like a huge box office
Mhm.
hit at the time. And I was struck with a couple things. Like, one, it was definitely something you don't see, the plot line of the film, which deals a lot with people having affairs and that type of thing, and treat it, yeah, it's a romantic comedy. And the tone of that is something you see a lot more in like French comedies, especially French romantic comedies, where the affairs are not positioned in a way where like you're supposed to not like the people or you're supposed to judge the people. It's just like a thing in the plot, and it's treated, pretty lightly too. Versus a movie that, maybe a movie about an affair is usually not a light romantic comedy. So it is definitely that tone, and not in a way that doesn't make sense. Like, she can do that, which is something in America I feel is a very hard thing to do. To walk that line of like, yeah, you basically just made like a French romantic comedy, but for an American audience with, some of the biggest stars in America, and it was a big hit. So she was able to walk that line somehow. So that I was impressed by. And it definitely was also a movie that was like, for sure, meant for a certain demographic of older people that can see this movie, but they're trying to insert things into the plot that would be typically more found in like a teenage comedy or something. There's drugs and it's funny. There's like gross out humor and then it's funny. There's all these like sex jokes that are like, again, very explicit, but that it's funny. So it's definitely like, oh, this is like a movie where, yeah, like, I might, be too old to watch American Pie, as a parent or whatever at that time. Like, oh yeah, I'm 50, I can't watch American Pie, but this is taking that type of humor and putting it around a package that is, digestible for someone in an older audience. Again, another reason why I think this movie was a big hit, because it found its audience. And yeah, everyone likes laughing at this stuff. Like, drugs can be funny, and the gross out humor can be really funny. It doesn't really matter how old you are, but she again was able to incorporate that in the guise of, a movie that, was, made for an older audience in terms of age, but it works, that it works. And I do think too, I'm also not surprised you talk about Meryl Streep so much, and just the cast, like the Baldwin, Streep, and Martin, because I do really feel that you need to bring like your own, baggage is a negative word, but your own like associations with these actors to make the characters likable. Like, if this was another actor and not Alec Baldwin or Steve Martin or Meryl Streep, all three actors I really like, doing this, I might be more quick to judge these characters and some of the things they do. But look, I like them already. I'm predisposed to like these people. So in the stuff that they're doing, I'm not being like, like, this is really bad. But it comes to in their performances as well. I mean, the one performance that annoys me, but this actor always annoys me, is John Krasinski. Like, same. I can't stand him as an actor. And in this movie, I was like, yeah, like, she's capturing your essence, because it's really annoying.
It's cringeworthy and sort of annoying, and it's
bad. Yeah. But totally. Whatever. He was a big star at the time, and
fits in the movie. It's him.
No, it totally fits in the movie. Yeah. And the other thing I'll say is, Steve Martin, who's an actor I really, really like. He is maybe never been as charming as he has in this movie. Like, he's the heart of the film, for sure. And he is able to carry that so well. And I think I need to think about this a little more, because it's a bold statement and I've only seen this film once, but it might be like Steve Martin's best performance, or the performance that most captures what makes him so endearing as a comedic actor. Like, it's all of his heart, because he's always someone I feel that is very heartfelt in his comedy. And this movie was more heart than comedy for his role, but I think no one else could have pulled that off in the same way that he does. He's just so charming. Like, I want to date this guy. Like, he's so, he's so charming, but in a way that isn't like as sleazy as what Alec Baldwin's trying to do. Totally. It's just, he fantastic performance. So I thought the movie was fine. It just wasn't necessarily for me, but I could definitely see why you like it, and definitely see why it's a big hit. And of the Nancy Meyers movies I've seen so far in my life, I think this is the most, the purest example of the skill set that she has and what she's able to do as a filmmaker. So
I think you liked it too, more than you might admit it.
Well, I guess I was going into it expecting not to like it. I'll say that. I was like, I'm probably not going to like this. Like, I don't like Nancy Meyers. I'm not big enough of a fan of Baldwin and Streep to carry me through. I know I like them, but they're not like my favorite actors. But I was, this actually is interesting, kind of what she pulled off. Maybe it's my age. Maybe I'm old enough now. And if I'd seen this movie when it came out, I'd be like, this is a movie that's, too old for me or whatever. So maybe it's a sign of my age. I don't know. But it was, it's fine. Like, it's It's not that complicated. It's,
It's not that complicated.
yeah.
Yeah, and with me also, some of it we talked a lot about this, including on this podcast. So when you meet a movie, and I think I
Sure.
met this movie when I'd moved to LA not too long ago.
Hmm.
I just left San Francisco, my one home, and India, my other home, not too long before that. So there's some elements of sort of, she's going to be an empty nester. The
Hmm.
kids are moving out, and she's sort of finding her new life. And she's taken years and years to get comfortable as a divorcee, and now
Hmm.
she's starting a new chapter and such. So I think I met this movie when all that totally different circumstances, totally different age, but there's
Right.
something about that time in my life, and of course Meryl and her performance that sort of really spoke to me. So that was my hook into it.
Mm.
I don't think this movie, when I first watched it, was what has become now for me. It's only after multiple viewings, and I would just come back for the croissant making scene, or I would come
Right.
back for, I'm do you put smock, like little scenes here and there. And but then over time, after watching it as a total piece, it's sort of taken a deeper meaning
Mm.
for me, and it's kind of become that comfort movie. So yeah, I think that's another interesting thing, that the other two movies were instant, Hall of Famers for me in the
Mm.
comfort repertoire when I watched them, because I was like, oh yeah, I know I'm going to be coming back to this entire thing over and over again because I love it so much. This was not that movie, but it sort of grew on me over time. It grew from a very specific hook.
No, interesting. Yeah, that makes sense in terms of the where you were at in your life and where the
Yeah,
Meryl character was in this film for why it like spoke to you, and then that's the hook in, and then you would watch it many times. But yeah, I mean, I do think, as we talked about earlier, comfort movie for me is something that I would have had to have watched a lot. Like it's hard for me
yeah,
really to watch a movie and predict, at least say, oh yeah, no, this is one I know I'm gonna like forever. Like sometimes you're wrong about that, but
true.
sometimes you're right. But it's that stood the test of time in your own personal timeline.
Yeah.
In terms of how many times you watched it, I think is what we've done with all these films. And speaking of all the films, what I'm sure you have a lot, as I do, on things that
Ugh,
didn't make it. Yeah.
gosh. So, I mean, if you're talking in total absolute senses, like
Yeah.
Julian, Devil Wears Prada would be
Mm.
my comfort movies of all time. I watched those movies probably the most in my adult life, for
Hmm.
sure. So that's sort of fits the Meryl kind of canon, and this was sort of next in that.
Mm.
But then on the mystery kind of period side, it's more TV, honestly.
Mm. Hmm.
Whether it's Marple or Poirot, for sure. Like I'm probably watching Poirot for the 200th time now again. So I keep coming back to that. And on the British sort of period piece, not that Grand Budapest Hotel is British, but European, if you will.
Sure. Sure.
We've covered some of them, like Howard's End and Remains of the Day, but also, Pride and Prejudice, the BBC series,
Mm.
Sense and Sensibility, like all of that is definitely in the comfort canon for me. Um, but then there's also a canon of like drama movies, which I almost put one here because there's some really deep, dark drama films like Spotlight or Doubt, or
They comfort
both
you?
happen to be in the Catholic Church. I don't
Yeah.
know, something must be wrong with me. But it's not about the subject matter, but it's
Huh.
about how well these movies are made.
Ah,
And
okay.
honestly, I could have put even, Network or Chinatown or some of these like horrible subject drama films on my comfort movie list. But then I had to kind of reckon with myself that, well, let's be honest, how many times will I actually revisit these? It's
Mm.
not a once a year thing. It's probably once in a few years thing. But,
Mm.
there's so many kind of intense drama movies, especially from the golden age of Hollywood as well, like All About Eve and such that we've talked about, that are in that rotation, but they are
Mm.
through and through dramas. There's nothing
Right.
funny about them, but I love them because they're so perfectly done. So, yeah.
Mm. That
What
makes
about you?
sense. Yeah, for me it was interesting. I made a list, and then I realized there were a lot of films that for some reason were sequels. So I
Huh.
have I have Blade 2, Mission Impossible 2, Terminator 2, Back to the Future 2, Pitch Perfect 2. I don't know, like again, it was like they were interspersed within other films, but for some reason sequels, and maybe it's just the
That's
comfort of
so
returning back to just weird.
interesting.
That those were all there. Any Star Wars film, like any single one of them, I definitely could have put on the list, but we talked about a couple already. Army of Darkness, I mentioned that was one of those films that I watched on that bus ride down in New York for the first time, and that movie still is another movie that is a B movie that knows what it is and is so fun to watch. And then a couple just random Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, Blues Brothers, and then the only serious drama I have on here, which is Michael Mann's Miami Vice, a movie that I think it's the mood and the atmosphere that just envelops me. And every time I see the movie, I just love it more and more. And anyway, but yeah, I don't know about the sequels. And then also why all my movies came out within basically 12 months of each other, which is kind of interesting too. I don't know.
That's interesting. Like I didn't even touch on kind of comfort movies from childhood, and we've covered a lot of them. It's Not a Music and Mary Poppins and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and such, but I almost have like a different comfort movie set from like childhood days versus what that looks like now. So what we went over today is sort of what that looks like now. So I would say the last like 15 years. But it's interesting that your comfort set is sort of carrying on from way back when.
I want to go back. Now we're getting into a podcast or a psychoanalysis, but yeah, maybe I do feel like a kid again when I watch these movies.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of like rediscovering my inner child is a comfort to me, perhaps. But that's another podcast.
That's another podcast, I guess.
I'll lie down on the couch and we'll do that.
For me, even as a kid, I think I've told you this, I often connected more with adults. Like I would, put my parents' kids, like my contemporaries, in my room and hand over the toys to them and then come back and hang out in the living room. So for me, it was the opposite.
Yeah.
Which is why like these movies, which are older movies, are in my comfort canon. So it's fascinating.
It's cool. Yeah. I bet as a 8-year-old, you would have watched It's Complicated and loved it.
Probably.
Yeah.
For different reasons, but I would have loved it.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, this was really fun, and hopefully for listeners, a good balance from our heavier episode last week on fears, as we get into that time of year that is that end of the year comfort time. So thank you all for listening. We hope you really enjoyed the discussion today and learned something about yourself, got some new movies to check out, maybe rethought about what is comfort to you. I think this is one of the topics we've done that is more subjective than objective. So
everybody has
probably they have their own reasons for it. Yeah, totally. Please make sure to subscribe to our podcast on whatever podcast platform of choice. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Make sure you tell your friends about us, not about you. And maybe people you watched movies with and that you find comfort with. Talk to them about us, and maybe have a discussion with them about what movies you guys both feel are comfortable. So, and until next time, talk to you later, Karan.
Bye.